It's getting really exciting behind me now. I've got chairs being put up because we've got a panel en route. So the panel is discussing some of my favorite words ever, actually. In what ways can creativity diversify youth access to heritage? Creativity, diversify, youth access, heritage. Beautiful. So I can't wait to hear what's going to happen. Lil Woods is going to be the moderator for that. Lil is a freelance artist and facilitator. We've got Meg Watts joining as well from Norfolk Wildlife Trust. We've got Kerith Ririe who is from National Trust. Jordan Hunnisett, Common Ground leader. Elle, who is Colchester and Ipswich Museums. And Kemka Ajoku, who is a photographer. We heard from him earlier. I can see people scooting off. However, the panel is happening now. So Lil, make yourself known. Okay, beautiful. And panelists, where are you? Panel members. Are you all out there? Okay. So everybody, welcome the panel.
Hello everyone, I'm Lil. I feel like I've been introduced multiple times to multiple people today, but I'm an artist and facilitator, and I'm going to be moderating the panel, which is hopefully going to mean not much talking from me, mostly talking from these lovely people. We've had a little introduction, but I just thought really quickly you could go round and say your names just so people can put your face to a name and just your job description, if that helps everyone in the audience.
Cool. Hi, yeah, I'm Jordan. I'm one of the Common Ground leaders, and yeah, I helped program and plan this event today.
Hi, I'm Meg. I'm the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Norfolk Wildlife Trust. I'm also a freelance writer, artist and climate justice activist.
Hi, my name is Kemka, and I'm a photographer who worked with English Heritage and Shout Out Loud on the England's New Lenses initiative. So I'm sorry I'm back here again, but that's it.
Hi, I'm Kerith. I work for the National Trust, currently working on a project in Wisbech with Peckover House.
Hi, I'm Elle, and I am a part of the Collections and Learning team at Colchester and Ipswich Museums.
Amazing. So we can see up here the question of the day, which is, in what ways can creativity diversify youth access to heritage? The panel is going to look something like this. I've just asked that question. We'll have a bit of a discussion about what that might mean, both for artists and artistic practices, but also through an organisational lens as well. We'll have a bit of chat about the challenges that we might face as well. And then towards the second half, we would love a little bit of participation by the audience. So we'll ask you to come up with some questions or some challenges or any ideas that we have in your tables for a few minutes, and then feed that back and have a bit of a sort of cross-pollination between audience and stage people. So yeah, that's what it's going to look like. I think, Jordan, if you'd like to kick us off, if you feel comfortable with what this question might mean for you.
Sure, yeah. So I think when it comes to diversifying youth access to heritage, I think that you need to take a critical approach to heritage, but via creativity. I think for me that's kind of the best way to engage young people in heritage, but also make heritage sites valuable to them and for our future. Just a little bit, I'll give a background on me to kind of explain my thinking about this. Essentially, I'm an environmental writer of eco-fiction. And a lot of what I do is reading and studying more traditional, classic, dystopian literature, sci-fi, that sort of thing. And particularly what you notice when reading these narratives about like an environmental apocalypse sort of vibe, it's always very doom and gloom. There's no real anything positive to take away from it, and it's always a lot of the time very much oh, humans, were lazy or stupid, they got themselves all killed, da, 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 da. Always this kind of very nihilistic approach to it. And I think essentially where I stand in the work that I do is trying to reframe these narratives to go, okay, well, yeah, environmental crisis is this big, scary thing that's going to be nasty in our future, but we need to talk about kind of how and why it's something that we face, and particularly not who is to blame per se, but what is to blame. And that means taking a critical stance of essentially the culture of the global north, our ideologies, our systems, and being critical of it. And I think it's, when it comes to heritage, what I've figured through Common Ground and working creatively with heritage is it's most engaging in attracting young people and diversifying the type of young people who engage with the heritage when it's taking this critical standpoint. I think as well, heritage sites are so valuable because they hold so much history, so many stories, so much, so juicy, you know what I mean? So they essentially are these spaces where if we take a creative, critical approach to them and see them in new ways, they literally become these spaces in which progress can be made. And I think that's kind of what the future of heritage needs to be.
I love that. I think what you say about using creativity to be critical in a way that is positive in the end. So we're not being critical for no reason. We're being critical in order to progress us to a point where these spaces can be for everyone. I think that's really interesting. Kemka, do you want to kick us off a little bit as well?
Sure. When you gave me the question, I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and for me, I had to just really look at my own experience with the idea of heritage. So with the project that I did, I actually found out about it through the PhotoWorks organization, and from there I found out about English heritage. And one thing I quite like about the initiative was the fact that they kind of made me focus on heritage, Before that, I never really ever heard the word heritage. It wasn't something that you hear on a daily basis. And then when I did this project, almost every single day, heritage was just on my mind. What does it mean to me? What is it, what is the meaning? How can I use it in my own way and put a twist to it? So I think with young people is that heritage, when you think of it, sounds like a dated term. It's always talking about the past. It's always talking about history, which tends to intrigue the older generations more. But when you have initiatives set in place where that is the focus that you want them to kind of fixate on, they have really little to no choice but to really put all their energy into it, Like you can take a horse to the water, but I think, with younger generations, sometimes you need to shove their head in it to make them drink. Not in that way, of course, but in a very kind of, child-friendly way. But yeah, with creativity, I think young people also, they like the idea of responsibility. When you're in schools, your teachers are telling you what to do all the time, and then when you're at home, your mom and dad are telling you what to do all the time. And especially with teenagers, they like the idea of having this idea that they're like, I'm old enough, I'm grown enough, I know what to do, I know how to handle things. And when they see organizations having initiatives where the younger generation are at the forefront of what they want to do, then that definitely engages them more than anything, really. So exactly for me, when I did my own project, English Heritage was just kind of like, hi, we are English Heritage, do the rest. And I was just kind of like, oh, And at first it was pretty daunting in a way because I'm so used to having someone tell me how they want things to do and doing it. But then it's also very empowering when you have that control to find ways in which you want it done. And more time is a lot better for, the younger generation to tell you how to do these things or how they want it done rather than the other way around. So I think that's one of the main ways in which the youth can have more access to heritage and understanding it. Sometimes you need to entice them with an idea or, have something there that just kind of kickstarts their idea and starts working on ways in which they can think about a certain topic. And for example, heritage is a great way to bridge that gap across generations. So.
Can I jump in?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that really and echo those points, which I totally agree with this idea of empowerment and how giving young people a space to explore what they want to explore and present it in the medium that makes sense to them is so empowering, and it really enables people. I don't know if you've heard this kind of businessy expression of we want go-getters, we want forward thinkers, we want divergent talent. It's you just want people that have their own ideas. You want ideas is what you want. And having creative approaches to things like heritage, to, sectors. So I work in the conservation sector, right? And so much of what we do is focused on the science and the numbers and conservation, which is really important, but we need to connect with more young people. We need more young people to be interested. It's a different kind of heritage. It's not even this stuff's old, but there were people and they had a society. It's this is, look at this grass. Isn't it phenomenal? And for us, it is. It's super exciting. And we put it in our work group chat. But, that's not the same experience for a lot of people. So for me, the reason that connecting with heritage is so important is, I'm being sly, is for environmental reasons. I want people to care about the planet. I want people to care about their home. How can you do that? By connecting them to where they are. It doesn't have to be where they were born, doesn't have to be where their family was from, it's where they are. So creative exploration and building your own narrative and your own story is a really powerful way to connect people who've migrated, for example, to a new place where they live. They're building their own stories, they're putting down their own roots, and those are stories that will continue to be passed on through family. So if we can get those stories to care and those stories to be of welcoming and enjoyment, not of hatred, that is really powerful. Yeah.
Thanks so much. I thought that was really brilliant, and especially what you were saying about focusing people on something, but then letting them go wild and go free, and to express themselves in a way that they feel comfortable is where the best work is, because they're passionate and you can feel the passion in what they're doing. Kerith, I wondered if you had any thoughts about how that initial enticement could be made in communities.
And that's a really interesting question, because quite often, we were speaking the other day about kind of when enticing communities, especially young people, we automatically go to an educational institute or something. So we're actually connecting with the teachers, not necessarily with the young people. It's the same when we go to families, where we're connecting with the parents. So what we do is we do a lot of partnership working and actually kind of go, okay, it's understanding where our strengths aren't, so we can work in partnership with people that can bring those strengths and go, okay, how can we connect direct with young people rather than kind of going, and connecting with, putting an extra barrier in between.
How you can put young people at the forefront of the thing right from the start, so it's not something else that someone else has told them to do, which I think is really important, and feeling like they're welcomed into the space from the beginning. I wondered if you had anything to say about that, Elle.
Am I on? Yeah. Is that lovely? Oh, there we are. I sometimes wonder if we need to jettison the word heritage, because actually your description of it, Kemka, is really valuable. I think what we're talking about is understanding who we are, where we're from, and that will be shared in some places. We will have things that we share, and those things allow us, if we're from, our views, our beliefs, our ways of seeing the world can be really different, but we can find those overlaps and stand in spaces safely together, and that will be increasingly needed in a world that feels really frightening to me. Like, the future's scary. And frankly, Gen Z are going to have to save it with our help. And understanding, yeah, no, I get it. Like, I'm really sorry, but like, we're here to help. But that's increasingly kind of how it looks to me. So I think there is a requirement that the people who are often being paid, so the practitioners, the people who are working in those organisations, they need to be really creative in how they understand their work, because that creativity will change, that will change structures, it will change hierarchies that create space. We can't just say to young people, come and be creative at us, because that's wonderful, but it doesn't change things. So you need to, I think, it requires you to decenter your ego, to understand your role as being useful and not being important. To be creative when you're problem solving, why things don't work, because often I'm not a young person, if people hadn't guessed, and I make the wrong call, and to be creative in how I think about that, and to find a way. I asked one of my colleagues for their thoughts on this question, and she said that practitioners need to be creative in their thoughts beyond art activities to think about how we create space for change, and that's a different proposition, I think.
That's interesting. It's a lot about listening. Actually, if you're listening to people and really absorbing it rather than just kind of tokenistically listening, and then you can kind of take that on.
I don't know the legalities when it comes to working with younger people, especially under the age of 18, but I feel like, I'll give an example. So last month it was my birthday or so, and I was telling my mum that I was gonna have dinner with my friends, and she was like, I'm young, I can come along, right? And I'm like, I love you, Mum, but...
Were you checking to see if your mum was listening?
Yeah, so she's somewhere, check the cameras, yeah. But it's a thing where we have this thing where nobody wants to be old, And sometimes to understand what young people want, we need young people in these spaces to actually show you a different perspective. And times are changing, when our older generation were younger, the world is completely different to where it is now, And just the idea of, if you're gonna work with younger people, if you're gonna work with teenagers, I'm not sure, like I said, I don't know legally where the threshold is, but have incentives, where these kids are getting rewarded, whether it's financially, whether it's maybe a gift or trips, I know usually things like budgets for organizations are pretty hard, and every time there's a new kind of budget announcement, we're always the ones that are getting the short end of the stick. But people like having incentives, whether we like it or not. Sometimes, if you have an idea and it's like, how do we get young people involved? There could be competitions, there can be grants, there could be ways that just entice them to have an idea about something, and then you realize when they come out of it, maybe it was the idea of winning this competition that got them drawn into it, but they've come out with a completely changed perspective on ideas such as heritage and, like you said, looking after the environment and how they see it and how they work to build a better world in a sense. So sometimes having a motive isn't always a bad thing if it comes out with a different, if it comes out for a different reason. And I think, young people do like the idea of just being rewarded in a way that adults do. So
we could straightforwardly pay people.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I come back to. I don't really like the idea of volunteering that much, because I'm paid.
Yeah.
I show up, I'm paid to be there, and often I'm the only person being paid in the room. It feels really unfair a lot of the time. And so Volunteering Matters is an incredible organisation, and they're paying their volunteers, for want of a better word, because that's fair.
Yeah.
And everyone can join in.
Yeah. It's a massive conversation in the arts, but also a massive conversation in any voluntary sector. Fair compensation is huge. You would hopefully be amazed. If you know that you're doing it, please stop. But you would be amazed how much stuff we get asked to do for free. Particularly as a queer person, oh yeah, tell me about your trauma. Tell me about the homophobia you experienced. Yeah, thanks, we're gonna use this interview for TV. Oh, we're not gonna credit you. That's happened to me 4 times now. This is what I'm saying. You become a person, the BBC's oh, we have their number. We'll get Meg. And I'm yay, I'm on the BBC, which is fun. But then, after a while, it becomes incredibly draining to be continually asked to talk about, personal issues related to your identities. So compensation is huge. I completely agree. I entered a competition because I could win 200 quid. I won 200 quid and I ended up running it. And we produced 2 climate writing anthologies, and I ran all these workshops, and it gave me the experience that ended up in me being like 20 and having managed teams and getting a job at the Wildlife Trust. And like that to me, I think is so important, like upskilling, because the main barriers, in my experience, when I was younger, the main barriers were time and money. I couldn't volunteer, I couldn't sit at home and write my magnum opus, I had to go work in the pub. You know what I mean? Like that wasn't really an option not to. So yeah, I think having some kind of benefit, like, there's benefit to you as an organization, but also you have a massive platform and you have the power to really lift people up and really boost them in their careers. And I know that the individuals who have done that for me have made such a massive difference in my life. Like, you have a lot of power in that, and the knowledge that you have is great. Like, it's so important, as organizations or as like older than young people, whatever that means. So there's a lot of benefit in teaching and mentoring, which is really valuable. But I'm not saying like soft touch, but collaboratively, as opposed to telling, working with is really key.
We need to get rid of the idea that the kudos of being involved is enough by way of reparation, and that relationship will always be unequal whilst that's the case.
Don't get me wrong, the kudos, it did help, but at great cost to my personal and physical health. It shouldn't be that if you want to work in the arts, you have to give up, years of your life and years of good mental health and free time and having fun to maybe get a job as an underpaid intern. You know what I mean? That shouldn't be right. That's a big barrier for sure.
Yeah, very much so. And I think there's this idea that, artists do art because they love art. And we do love art, don't get me wrong, but don't worry, their passion will drive them. And it's like, no, we need to survive, and I feel like for some reason, I don't want to keep going back to the whole thing about money, but it's just it's a topic that's always kind of dodged when it comes to ways in which you can bring people out. And I feel like kids are exploited in that sense, where there's so many young kids who are doing so many extracurricular activities, and parents just do it so that they're out of the house. But if you can have an initiative where, kids are getting paid, you're having ways that, first of all, they're exposed to money, they're learning how to manage money, they're learning and making mistakes while they're younger, they can afford to do so. What happens to a lot of young people is that when they get older and maybe they make money quickly or they make money faster than they expect to, they don't know how to manage it. They fall into these issues, and when these issues come, that's a huge disadvantage because they didn't have that training or those programs where they could. And going back to what I was saying, just the idea of having something that just sparks the idea in their head and then seeing what progresses from it. I mean, we've all worked jobs where we were entering it for the money, but then when you come out, you've learned so many skills. You know how to do this, you know how to communicate, you know how to, face challenges and overcome them. And I'm sure that those lessons wouldn't have come if you weren't enticed into doing the job with pay. So that's just one of the main reasons. I mean, hopefully this is the last time I speak about it. But just finding, enticing ways to just get kids out and get kids to think about things that are important. I think it will work out well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I have this conversation with my friends all the time about, you want it, but how are you, what am I getting in return for this effort? And I wondered, perhaps you, Kerith, could have a little chat about maybe some interesting ideas or tips or ways that have worked for you in terms of getting meaningful creative engagement from participants in communities.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, as I said before, a lot of it is about listening. It's about listening to the communities and what the community want. And so that's kind of a bit the project, what we're doing at the moment. We're right at the beginning and just in that listening stage so we can fully understand what it is and remember that it's not about us, it's about people. And I think that's quite often is the mistaken thing. We're so concentrating on the heritage, but actually it's about the people and that we need to kind of listen to that. And so a lot of that is it's about, as I said before, about kind of working in partnership. So when we're kind of going out and we're listening, so there's one project in Colchester where what we've done is we've worked with an organisation, Chameleon Education and Wellbeing, and they work with young people outside the school education system, and they do young people-led learning. And what we do on those days, no staff, no volunteers, nobody is allowed on site. That site is theirs. So we've actually handed over the site to somebody else. And I think that was a really important lesson there, because sometimes we're so risk adverse that we actually cause risk. And we've gone, okay, what could actually happen? You know, what could go wrong? We've got to place trust into other people and go, on those days, that is your space. You do what you want.
Yeah, I think a lot of this conversation has actually been around power and what power people hold in spaces and how they might use that power for good or bad. Did you have something to add, Meg?
Yeah, I was just gonna totally, I think that's really cool. I would have loved that. And also, you always find if you leave a bunch of kids alone, one of them was like, I'll be the grown-up now, and then you end up with this little troop. Yeah, I was just gonna agree and say one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot in terms of connection, right? So I'm thinking about connection to think about the environment, but I'm thinking about how young people connect to where they are. And one of the big things I've been thinking about is the Right to Roam campaign and where we're allowed to be. So Right to Roam looking to extend the countryside right-of-way, so decriminalising trespass, basically. So you're good to walk where you want to walk. You'd think that you'd be good to walk in your home, but we aren't. A lot of us aren't. And particularly as young people, there's also the question of safety. There's the question of, will people think you're, behaving antisocially? Will, I don't know, Doris 89 call, the police on the boy skateboarding outside? You're not necessarily feel that allowed to exist. If you're in school, you're in an institution where you have to be some places, but you can't be other places. And if you go inside when it's raining, you get a detention. And you're sort of shepherded about. So it's really nice. That sounds so awesome to be given a space and to be trusted with it and think oh my God, wow. Oh. And it really and I think we've seen this in all the Common Ground work, it really enables you to be yourself, which in itself is amazing. And it's something that a lot of younger kids working out their identities, they won't know who they are, you know what I mean? So it's great to give them a space to explore that. Yeah, so exactly what we were talking about power, there has to be a benefit for young people to want to do something, and it has to be a meaningful benefit, whether that's money that can aid them in the rest of their life, maybe they want to buy a camera, maybe they're saving up for something, whether it's, experience that gives them real world sort of kudos, like we mentioned earlier, stuff that can help them get a job, skill building, whether it's being able to exist in a space and be themselves, that is so powerful. And feeling listened to is key, and being listened to is even more key. Yeah.
We've got a couple of minutes left, so please, any closing remarks before we go to the audience?
Yeah, I just want to say, oh wow, now I can't think of it anymore. But I think is essentially you need to change, I've gotten it now, you need to change your perspective on why do you want youth working or being a part of what you're doing. A lot of the times, maybe, for example, if you're working in a heritage site that is big on preservation and, elongating the legacy of it, we want to introduce kids and younger people into showing them what this is about so that maybe out of 100, a fraction of them would actually want to pursue it in, the future. But then if you change your narrative and you actually say, we want to do this thing because we want to actually spark something in one kid's mind that just says to them, I can do this, or I may not be interested in this thing, but in going to this, I've realized that I actually like this. It changes how you approach your whole process. So I think at the end, what you should really do is, or what could be done, I'm not telling you what to do, please, I don't know anything, but you could find ways in which you reassess what the goal is. Because kids are doing it, they're part of the program. I mean, they are going to be involved one way or the other, but what are they going to come out with? You know, what skills are they going to learn? What connections are they going to make to friends? There's so much schools can do, and like you said, schools sometimes can be just almost like a slaughterhouse in the sense where like you're forced to go, you're forced to enter school and you might not really like school, or, you know, there may be somebody who has difficulty learning certain subjects and like the way they're being taught isn't working for them, but then they find something else that isn't taught in schools and their interests are piqued, you know. They may go home and tell their parents how much they love it, and their parents realize, oh, finally I found something that my kid is actually interested in, you know. Doing that alone is just, you know, planting a good seed in your company or your organization and what you're doing. And inevitably what's going to happen is that when the goal changes, or when, you know, the reason you do it change, you see a growth in who comes into it, because the kids will tell other kids, you know. People will see what's going on. The older generation, they'll post it on social media if it's cool to them. If it's not cool to them, they won't do it, you know. So, yeah, before I kind of get shoving off here, I think that's just one of the main things that we can do, just changing our goals and the narratives of why we do what we do.
Go on, Meg, quickly.
Okay, I'm going to be really quick. On the subject of that, like, word of mouth is so important. Like, if a group of teenagers, for example, was like, yeah, your organization's like, yeah, actually they're all right, you will know, because you will see an influx of other teenagers. And I know, because normally I'm the teenager, or like ex-teenager, being like, yeah, they're actually sick. Like, I know it sounds really boring, but it's really cool. And yeah, and it works. The other massive thing on changing goals, which I completely agree with, is changing how you measure those goals. I know that, for example, with our organization, so much of our funding asks for all of these, like, you know, quantitative, like, you will show X percentage, da-da-da-da. But we're realizing that, or we've realized that this approach, like, it gives you hard facts, and it might work for measuring the biodiversity of a site, but it's really difficult to measure anything in humans, because how you feel about somewhere is so subjective. So working to think more creatively about what kind of data you want to gather, if you have to gather data for funding applications and so on. I'm hoping the funding people will also realize this, because that would make everyone's lives a lot easier. But yeah, accepting more sort of qualitative feeling-based results and slow-growing results as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think being creative, not just in like creative acts, but thinking creatively as an organization, as a team of people, bringing what skills you have that might not necessarily be aligned to your job, but thinking differently, thinking outside the box is really great. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes. Does anyone have any burning questions? Ooh, okay. Well then, okay, you've got 2 minutes in your groups, and I'd like you to come up with a challenge, a provocation, or a question in the next 2 minutes. And then we're gonna have one at the end. Off you go. Does anyone have anything really good or really bad? Has anyone got anything that they think the panelists might be able to help them with? Ooh, lovely, thank you.
You were kind of giving the vibe that you do agree with this, but I'm just going to ask it anyway. So, do you think there's an organisational responsibility to put young people in leadership roles, and how do you make that meaningful in the heritage and arts sector?
Very good question. So putting young people in meaningful leadership roles. Okay, I'm going to think. Does anyone have any ideas?
We haven't done, so Sim at Colchester and Ipswich Museums, we haven't done this yet, but I'm currently looking at my manager with a smile because I had an idea the other day that I'd like to talk to you about. But I do think I'm really bored of traineeships that assume that the person will be coming in with nothing and will benevolently lift them up to the possibility of maybe having a job in the heritage sector. And I'm just like, it's quite embarrassing, and I don't want to sell that to people. There are places that do management trainees, and that to me is a much more sensible idea, because when you train people to be managers, they will create systems that facilitate more people coming in from different backgrounds. But if you start as a trainee in an organisation, you look up and there's no one that can support you or who even understands a little bit of what it's like to feel where you are. Like, I think that's a massive problem. That's an understatement.
I've remembered some things. I'll give you some wildlife trust things. So some things, first of all, like we have a board of trustees, so we have a youth trustee. We're looking at developing a youth forum. We're looking at developing young rangers. The lovely Isabel is the person to talk to about all things youth. So upskilling and supporting young people in kind of getting the skills that would enable them to then work in conservation, and then having a board or a council to include, essentially, and to include their considerations. And that has to be done meaningfully, because young people will smell from a mile off if it's tokenistic, and they'll know if they just sit there and nothing happens. I know that I've been the youth rep on boards and just been like, you are here so I can say yes, and then it really surprises people when you're there and they go, oh, by the way, do you think students will like this policy that we've already put in place? And I'm like, no, students will hate that. Why did you do that? And they're like, oh, well, you thought it'd be fine. And it's like, why are you consulting students after you've put the policy in place? Like, what's happening? So including people in young people in your consultation, active listening is massive. One of the other things related to your point is that Derbyshire Wildlife Trust has an early talent manager. So their whole role is separate to a line manager, is to support people just coming in to the industry. So that could be new starters or that could be career changes, but it's a hand to be that person to support and to understand, like, okay, you're new, this is how everything works, this is like who you need to talk to, from a like really personalized place. So that's also cool. Those are some sort of semi-practical solutions.
And it's making sure that they keep their own voice as well, that we're not just shaping people in our image.
Yeah.
Except people being angry with you. I spent a lot of the first year at my job complaining so much, and it led from me working in communications to getting a job, working in strategy. So I obviously said something right. I just complained a lot and it worked and people listened to me and I'm really grateful they listened to me.
Does anyone else have a challenge or a question or a provocation? Ooh.
It's kind of about accountability. So things obviously don't go right all the time. We wouldn't be here if, youth engagement in heritage was perfect. It's clearly not. What happens when things aren't right? What happens when people do feel like they're being taken advantage of, things are tokenistic? Because I think there is a place for feedback forms, but how are things actually activated, and how do you think we need to be more transparent about that process?
I think it's ownership, owning up to where mistakes are making and learning from them. So kind of taking it apart and understanding why it went wrong and having that open conversation. Sometimes they're difficult conversations, but it's important to have them in order to take that learnings. So then when you're moving forward, you've changed the ways that you work. Yeah.
I'm often aware that I'm almost an intermediary. So my role is very outwardly focused, and often decisions are being made by people more senior than me. That affect the community work we're doing. And actually one of the most straightforwardly helpful things I've ever found is making sure that I'm not in the middle of that, to put, for example, a manager in a room with the people that the project is with and just letting them have a conversation without me, because it's really easy for me to think I'm being helpful, but actually I'm just massively in the way. And if I can get out the way, those conversations can happen between the people they need to happen with. And also, I'm not as compelling as, a 17-year-old saying that they feel excluded from an organisation. Like, I can say, this actually wasn't a great decision, I think you made, but it will never be the same as those as that connection happening without me in the way, I think.
That's very cool. That's very cool.
So, I'm going to come up at this side. That's actually all we've got time for, which is a shame, because we could be up here for ages just getting angry and passionate. I'd be up for it. But we can carry it on later in the pub, if you would like, over a pint. I'd like to say thank you so much to our panellists who have just brought such openness and honesty and clarity with them onto the stage. So thank you very much to you guys.
Thanks for having us.